everybody. If I mention Nürburgring lap record attempts, you're likely to conjure up images of 911 GT3s, Nissan GTRs, Pagani Zondas, and latterly the likes of the Lamborghini STO. But once upon a time, Subaru also had a crack at it, and they were so serious about it, they built an entire car just for the task. And that's what I'm driving today. This is the 2004 Subaru Impreza WRX STI Spec C Type RA. I've never managed to quite work out why, but it seems that not a lot of people who watch this channel are actually into their Japanese machinery. So, if you happen to be watching today's video and you've enjoyed it, please, I would ask if you share it with all of your Japanese car-loving friends, and if you haven't yet subscribed, please hit that button and, if you'd be so kind, the bell icon too. The channel is currently on its way to 300,000 subscribers, and I reckon if I can ask enough people nicely, then I might just be able to make that in time for my birthday. So if you haven't already, hit the button. Anyway, regardless of if you are or aren't a Japanese car fan, deciphering the many different Imprezas out there can be somewhat difficult. So, in order to understand exactly what it is I'm driving today, I'll give you a potted history. The first Impreza of note is what today is called the Classic. That's the one that was in production from the 1990s until the turn of the millennium. It's the car associated with Colin McRae and produced the likes of the P1 and the mighty auction-battering 22B, of which I've driven an example. The car was replaced with an all-new version that saw many major mechanical changes. These lasted from about 2001 until 2007 and are collectively known as the New Age cars, though they are subdivided into three major categories named for the style of headlights they employed. First up, you had the bug eye, which is generally the least loved of them all. Then you have this, the blob eye, and finally the hawk eye, which was then discontinued when the Impreza WRX was replaced by the hatchback variant that at the time just about nobody liked, though today many, myself included, have actually developed something of a fondness for. Though the regular cooking Impreza has always been available to the UK market, I think really it's the higher performance variants that have always gotten our attention. The WRX for World Rally Experimental was your starting point in terms of interesting cars, and then you had on top of that the STI. This is of particular note to UK buyers because up until the new age, I don't think the STI was actually ever available here. Though you did get them, they were all grey imports. And oh my, haven't I picked just about the best time to try and review a high-performance car. And yes, I know it's a rally car, and yes, I know these are the conditions where the superiority of Subaru's symmetrical all-wheel drive should be showing itself. But it's also somebody else's car, and I would really, really like to return it generally unharmed. It looks nicer that way, so that's where I'm going, and oh my. Just to confuse matters even further, on top of the WRX and STI, you had the WRX STI RA, which was essentially a more cost-conscious version of the STI that did away with a few luxuries and was sold at a slightly lower price. Then, in about, I think, 2002, Subaru Anorax in the comment section, help me out if I got this wrong, the RA morphed into the Spec C. And that is when the car started to make a little bit more sense, because it became more akin to, say, a 968 Club Sport, a Renault Clio Cup. In other words, it still did without a few luxuries, but now had an increased sporting focus. So it was stiffer, lower, all that good stuff, making it even more appealing for the dedicated driver. It was also a very popular base for motorsport applications who are going to chuck out lots of the posh stuff anyway. Not that a Subaru has ever been accused of being an overly luxurious vehicle. The interior of this, let's be honest, is just about the same as every other Subaru of its time. Or before its time, or after its time. In other words, it's functional, it's pleasant, the seats are cracking, the dash is very simple, very easy to read, love the red backlighting, but it's unlikely to win any awards. However, I'm getting sidetracked. What I've got here today is not just a WRX, not just an STI, or a Spec C, or even an RA. It is in fact the WRX STI Spec C Type RA. This was a model introduced in 2004, and it was built for one very specific purpose. The sticker on the side gives it away. It was built to go after the Nürburgring. And though I know keep attacking the Nürburgring may sound like a Green Party manifesto, that's not what they meant. You see, back in the early 2000s, Subaru, for whatever reason, and I really can't fathom it, decided they fancied to go at the green hell. And being Japanese, they didn't want to walk away empty-handed. First off, they sent the regular Spec C over, and that recorded a very good time. 8 minutes and 6 seconds, which is still impressive even today for a relatively modest car that, remember, was still built in the era of the Japanese Gentleman's Agreement and therefore made do with just 276 horsepower. The RA was effectively a homologation special, based on the Spec C, but with a few extra goodies to allow it to get below that magic 8-minute marker. So you got a carbon fibre lip at the front, which this car has subsequently lost, the very distinctive carbon fibre wing at the back. You had a different diffuser, you got N-key wheels, you also got dramatically different suspension, which, depending on what source you believe, different dampers, different settings, various lightweight and unusual elements, mostly pinched from the optional Subaru STI catalogue. The car also has, and I'm not sure if this is a Spec C or RA thing, a gargantuan 12-litre tank in the boot for the intercooler water spray. And let's face it, anything with an intercooler water spray is automatically just better. The car also got a quicker steering rack, a different exhaust, and you've even got a rally-style little flap up here to allow a bit of ventilation into the cabin. I did think that meant this car, therefore, doesn't have air conditioning, but it in fact does. The reason the car's been steaming up so much today is that said air conditioning is not presently working. However, the rest of it is. And so, despite the fact it's a little bit soggy out there, I do know this car's capabilities and I intend to explore them a little bit. So, let's find out just how this ranks amongst all the other many Subarus I'm sure you've seen, which no doubt look very, very similar to you, because they do to me. This is a fantastically well set up car. Although, this being a Subaru, it is almost certainly not going to surprise you to hear that this one isn't entirely standard. Though, as these things go, the modifications are relatively minor. The biggest, and perhaps most disappointing, is the fact that the suspension has been replaced. Apparently, the original setup is relatively difficult to get a hold of now, and so the previous owner removed it from the car before it got to the point where it was totally trashed. It is now, however, wearing a Bilstein setup, which I have to say feels very, very well configured for these roads. More on that in a little bit. The car has also had the obligatory remap and is now allegedly putting out around 350 horsepower, which I believe. Torque I don't have a figure for, but originally it would have been around the 300 pound-foot mark, which is around 400 newton meters. The exhaust has also been replaced, though I have to say, if I hadn't been told that, I wouldn't have guessed it, because though you can certainly hear the car, it is not overly loud and raucous in the way that far, far too many Subarus are. You may have also noticed the fact that it doesn't actually sound like your typical Subaru. Now that's got nothing to do with the aftermarket exhaust. That's because this is an example of a Japanese market car, and these came with equal length manifolds from the factory. They also had a forged 2-litre engine. Subaru of Japan never really went for the 2.5-litre that saw service in much of the rest of the world, and so not only are they quite a bit more durable than the 2.5-litre, they also sound distinctly different too. As we've got a bit of a straight here and no traffic, let me give you a pull to the 8,000 RPM red line. Let's go. It is a beautiful engine, this. Come about 7,000 to 7,500 RPM, it does start losing interest. It doesn't rev out like a naturally aspirated car, but the fact is it starts pulling at about 2,500, 3,000 RPM, giving you a very broad and usable power band. I like this a lot. The speed is just about right for this kind of road, certainly in these conditions. As with every other Impreza, you've also got excellent visibility. The car is not that big or wide, and it's very, very sure-footed. The Spec C RA, and I think possibly the Spec C of this era too, also got the DCCD, which is the driver-controlled center differential. I've left it in auto mode, which is what just about everybody recommends me to do, but if you do fancy tarting around with it, you can control the distribution of torque. As ever with Subarus, the steering is something of a weakness. Now I have to say it's certainly better than many other new age cars that I've driven. I do appreciate the quicker rag, though it's certainly not anywhere near fast enough to unsettle the car, and this 6-speed gearbox is absolute perfection. I know Honda get all the love for their gearboxes with the likes of the S2000, but as an S2000 owner, let me say, Subaru, you know how to do a gearbox. The 6 speeds are also quite a bit more durable than the old 5 speeds. Those were made of glass and broken dreams. Having been out with the owner just before I started filming, I can also tell you that in a bend, when you've got quite a bit of grease and water on the road, if the car does begin to slip, it adopts a very natural sort of 4-wheel slide that appears quite controllable and not at all intimidating. This car has also been polybushed throughout, and I have to say I was worried that would mean that the ride would just be intolerable. It's not at all. It is firm. You can feel it, particularly at lower speeds. But compared to, say, a 996 era 911 with its sport suspension, it's really not that bad. You've also got plenty of room in here. It's just about a proper 4-seater, provided you're not all 6'3", and the boot, as ever, is an excellent size too, making this a very usable car. Its owner, Ross, previously had a Mitsubishi Evo 5, which he'd enjoyed for a number of years and fancied a change, which is why he went for the Subaru. He didn't initially go looking for one of these, but I'm sure we've all experienced the classic budget and feature creep, and so he decided this was probably the sweet spot of the range. There was another Spec C Type RA that came after this car in 2005, which introduced a few more features, including pillow balls for the suspension, which as a troglodyte I don't really understand. And then later on you got the Spec C RAR, which is not to be confused with this car. That really is the sort of 911 GT3 RS of the lineup, and went even further and included engine modifications too. Those today command quite significant money. If anything, the main thing bugging me right now is the fact that the car doesn't seem to have much in the way of noise insulation. You can hear an awful lot of both road and wind noise, and the dash is rattling as well. Might be those gauges here, which are not original factory fitment, but are genuine Subaru STI genome items. Not quite so sure what the genome bit means, but they look pretty decent, and when you turn them on, they do a nice sort of sweep, and they look proper, they work. Over here you've got turbo boost, and on the left you've got temperature for water and oil, and pressure for the oil too. It's great, this thing. It's geared nice and short too, so you can get to enjoy that gearbox a little more than you might with the equivalent 911, and it is finding quite a bit of grip, I have to say. I was a bit on the fence about cancelling today's review for reasons that I suspect became very obvious early on, but I'm glad that I didn't, because this is quite fantastic. Sure, the interior is low rent. It's a Subaru. Oh, actually, I'm going to slow down a little bit. I want to see what the vent up here is like. There is a bit up here in Japanese, which I don't understand, but there is 80 km/h, so I've slowed down to that. And oh, crumbs! Well, that does a lot. Yeah. Yeah, that's, yeah. Oh, I'm actually struggling to shut it as well. Oh, yeah, that's very refreshing. Oh, I like that. In 6th gear there, just below 2,500 RPM. Car pulls nicely. Oh, I did forget to mention, there is a Cosworth induction kit as well. Anyone who buys Cosworth bits for their car, I think, wasn't going to skimp on anything else. And this certainly feels like a car that has been very well cared for. The interior in particular is in really, really good condition, and for cars of this type, that shows you whether the previous owners have loved it or have just abused it. get it up to just about the national speed limit, and those Bilstein dampers do make an awful lot of sense. This car also doesn't feel anywhere near as front-led as many other Subarus I've driven, and given the fact that today conditions are not on my side, if it was, you'd know. Brakes seem pretty decent, again because of conditions I can't really judge their stopping power, but they're nice big gold-coloured Brembos, which I like. Curiously, a lot of the Spec C Type RAs that I've seen actually aren't the classic Subaru blue, as we have here. Instead, a lot of them seem to be white, which it actually wears quite well. I've never really been a big fan of that rear wing, but now I understand it's actually part of a kit. It's something proper. I do have a little bit more respect for it. And I suspect, given the nature of this car, they didn't put it on there for looks. They certainly did not. Subaru achieved their goal with the Spec C Type RA setting a Nürburgring lap time of 7 minutes and 59 seconds. Back in 2004, that put it in serious company with the likes of an NSX Type R, Ferrari 360 Challenge Stradale, Skyline R33 GTR, and 911 Carrera S and GT3 setting similar times. It is one of those cars where you put your foot down, drive it hard, and you think you're probably doing triple digits. You look down and you're not. But in all honesty, today, I consider that to be a very good thing. It's still not slow, and on a tight, demanding road, it's easily capable of raising a smile. Back off, and it's still a really enjoyable car. Very interactive, that gearbox in particular, I love. I keep pushing it through bends too, where I think, you know what, maybe it's just going to start to wash a little bit wide, and it refuses to. There is always a morsel of turbo lag when you ask the car to give you its performance, but after that's passed, it does everything you ask it for readily and happily. 70,000 miles on this example too, and I've got to say, it does not look or feel it. Apologies, by the way, for all the flies in some of the earlier static shots. Don't know quite what was going on there. I am in Scotland. This is a hazard. The car is clean. It does not smell of dung, I assure you. So then, with all Subarus sometimes looking and feeling like they're all exactly the same thing, is the Spec C Type RA worth your money? And how much money would it require to get your hands on one? To answer the latter question first, about £25,000, which in some ways is quite a bit of money when you could go and buy something that looks a lot like this for 7 or 8, but it's not going to be something like this. But if you compare it with the likes of, say, an Evo Tommy Mac, an Impreza P1 or a 22B, though I accept and understand that those are very special and highly collectible cars in their own right, in terms of driving experience, this I think beats all but perhaps the Tommy Mac, and those are beginning to command serious money. In the case of the 22B, just eye-wateringly daft sums. Colin McRae's own 22B is currently about to hit the auction block, and heaven knows what that is going to reach, but I expect it to be a record for a Subaru. These were produced explicitly for the Japanese market and in relatively limited numbers, just 300 for 1 year only. That will certainly help, and though I know the RAR is an even more desirable car still, that again does command something like triple the value of one of these, leaving this at a price where I think you could still use it relatively frequently without feeling too bad, and aside from the fact that some of the parts are difficult to get a hold of, it is still fundamentally a WRX STI, so it's not really going to be any more demanding to look after than any other. And yet, even with those highly desirable, ultra-collectible examples now fetching silly money, the regular Impreza WRX is still a car that is tarred with the brush of being the automobile for hooligans. And that, I think, is a real shame, because as a petrol head, let alone a fan of Japanese machinery of a certain age, this is a great car. And though for this kind of money there is a lot of other stuff that would tempt you, BMW M3, Porsche 911, there's a lot to be said for this. I certainly wouldn't have been putting my boot down in an E46 M3 with anywhere near the gusto I have of this on a day like today. And so I suppose maybe those journos were right. It is these conditions where the Subaru shows you just how good it really is. I like this car a lot. And I want to say a huge thank you to Ross for bringing it out, and as ever, to you for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button, comment down below, and subscribe if you haven't already. I'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.